Have you ever wondered how we create those beautiful and delicate sugar tulips that we add to cakes? Well, today is your lucky day. This is your sneak peek into the Finespun Cakes Academy membership, and we come out with new tutorials every single month, including flowers just like this. If that sounds like something you would be interested in, you can check it out and join us in the description box below. Join me as we color, shape our petals, and then bring these tulips to life with edible pollen and dust. Together we'll explore step-by-step techniques, pro tips, and insider secrets to creating your most beautiful sugar flowers yet. So are you ready to turn your kitchen into a sugary garden? So grab your apron, sharpen up those creativity skills, and hit that subscribe button because you will not want to miss this beautiful tutorial. So I'm just prepping for my tulips here. These I think are all the tools I'm going to use, but of course I will put that all in the PDF. So for coloring, I want to do a coral color, and I think I'm going to need the pink, peach, egg yellow, and then maybe lemon yellow as well. I will confirm during the coloring segment. I've also got this veiner here, which is from Sugar Delights, and the matching cutter. So this is, I think, for a French tulip. If you have any sort of tulip veiner, that'll work well. It's just like a very subtle veining pattern. It's nothing really too intense. I've also got, of course, my needle nose pliers and some 24 gauge wire, and this is in white so that we, kind of try and avoid seeing it through the gum paste. I've got two Dresden tools here. I like both the Ateco and the PME one for this. My wooden skewer. I've got a nice big ball tool, a small rolling pin, my water, and then I've got some of these egg molds to dry the petals in as we make them. Of course, my foam mat, just a normal white foam mat is great, and a double piece of plastic wrap with a damp towel over top. We also need our cell board. Any type of groove board is great for this. It's just so that we can have a slightly thinner petal and also still have that really nice thick veining area, just to make sure that these petals are really nice and secure on the wire. You're also going to need some green gum paste, and this was colored with gooseberry and spruce. This is going to be for the centers of your flowers. So let's get into coloring first. I will confirm all the colors that I end up using, and then we can start rolling and making these petals. So first off, I had a little bit of extra, like a very pale orange color, almost a corally color, and this is just peach and a little bit of pink. So now I am making more of a master color with my peach, pink, and the egg yellow, which is like the warmer yellow. And I just want to test to make sure this is the right combination of colors before we, commit to the entire amount. Just keeping in mind here that my original color is a little bit more on the orange side, so I'm going to counterbalance that with a little bit more of the yellow and the pink. Okay, I think this is looking really nice. Let's mix this into our main amount. And I'm making 3 of these coral tulips. So I have like a fairly decent sized handful of this color. I don't know if I'll use it all, but I think in the summer I always end up using this kind of corally color. So I will use it at some point, no matter what. Let's mix in about half of that to start, and we can then gauge how we like it. After mixing in half of the gum paste, this is what we have for color, and I am pretty happy with this. I am, of course, going to add more depth when we go into the dusting. The only thing I want to do to this is add something to mute it down a touch. So I'm going to just add a touch of that green in that we're going to be using for the centers. Just a very small amount, and that will just help make it a little less vibrant, at least in person. We want the color to look natural. So I will knead that through, and then we'll get ready for rolling and shaping. I'm going to start with just a small handful of gum paste here. So what we're going to do is just flatten that out a little bit, and then we're rolling it through the pasta machine just to a number 1. That will still give us some room to roll it on our groove board. So I'm just rolling it into a rectangle that will fit nicely once we roll it through the pasta machine. So it'll get a little bit longer this way. All right, so I'll roll it through to number 1. Then take your groove board and put your gum paste on it. Just give it a quick smooth, and then we're going to start rolling it. So I'm going to start in an up and down motion. I'm trying to keep this as even as possible throughout. And then I'm gonna go on a diagonal, and I find this just helps kind of coax it into the little grooves a bit better. So just very like long strokes. We don't want like a bunch of little marks along our gum paste. We're just trying to thin it out and really get a nice groove in our gum paste so that we have a good spot for our wires to go. So I'm just going to peel that off, and it's going to come off really nicely since we already put shortening on our groove board. Next, what I'm going to do is just stretch it out a tiny bit. This cutter I have, it like just fits if we stretch it out a little bit, so we're going to do that. You can just fudge it a tiny bit, and then grab your cutter, make sure it's nice and clean, and then we can start cutting. So we'll start from this side, and I'm going to try and bring my cutter right to the base of where the veining area is and center that veining spot too, and just give it a nice wiggle. And with these metal cutters, it does cut really nicely, so clean on the edges. And I will just continue on. You can see it like just fits, and that's because we did the little stretching action, so it gave us a bit more leeway for cutting. And then for our final one, this veiner is a little bit longer because it's meant for bigger petals. So I'm just gonna move my cutter up a little bit so it's not too thick. Okay, let's put these aside under a double piece of plastic wrap with a damp towel over top, and then we will be back in a moment. Let's start with just one petal so I can show you the method that we're using. So take your one petal, and one of your wires, these are the white 24 gauge wires that we cut into thirds. Put a tiny bit of water on the end and wipe off the excess. Now have both of your fingers on either side and thread that wire through. So we're gonna go up about a third of the way, maybe a little bit less for this veiner, just because it does tend to poke out here if you thread it up too much. So maybe a quarter of the way is a little bit safer. But again, you'll have to just test your own veiners when you are in the process of making flowers. So I'm just giving it a nice pinch at the base to secure it onto the wire. Now I'm going to take my large ball tool, and this is going to thin out the edges. So it's half on and half off. In the hellebore section of the membership, I actually have some tips and tricks for using wires in your petals. I know it's a little bit tricky for people when they're just starting out, so yeah, if you want to check that out, it is currently in the membership. So what I've done is just thinned out the edges enough without making them too big, because we need it to still fit within the veiner. Next, this is a technique that I've just started doing recently because I kind of observed that tulips, they never are perfect on the edge. So what I'm going to do is just make some little snips. Just trying to make it organic and a little bit random. Just like that. Then let's grab our veiner. I'm going to place it down like this. So the veining side is going to be on the inside of the petal. I'm just going to adjust it in there to make sure that it is flush. And then take our other side of the veiner and give it a really nice press. Just make sure it's all centered before you do that. Okay. Now we remove this. Our wire is poking out just a little bit, so I'm just going to cheat that back in a touch. Flip that over, and I kind of like to open up the little parts that I cut. And this is a method I learned from Jacqueline Butler, Modern Sugar Flower book. I love her book so much. So I'm putting a wooden skewer underneath, and that's just to give it a little bit more shape as we continue to kind of work with this petal and adjust it. Next, I'm gonna take a Dresden tool. So I take my very kind of wide and flat Dresden tool, and I'm going to make a little bit of like maybe like a U shape here. So I'm gonna start here and just do a little bit in, and then I'm gonna come around and I'm pressing down and curling the petal upwards towards me. And this just gives it a little bit more texture on the ends. Next, let's flip our petal over. And I'm gonna take the thin end of the Dresden tool, and I'm just gonna reinforce that central line. Sometimes it gets a bit lost with all of our other texturing and stuff. So this is pretty much complete, unless you wanna add any other textures. Now I have my egg mold here, and what I'm gonna do is just gently shape that into the mold. I don't love pressing these down all the way. I find it's too curved, so I kind of just lay it down and let it gently kind of sit in the mold, yeah, without pressing it completely. I'll do like a mix of both, but this is generally how I like to do them. So it's kind of floating a little bit on the bottom. Let's do a couple more quickly so you can see it more in real time. So I'll do 2, grab 2 of my wires, just putting a tiny bit of water on the end, wiping off the excess. Then we thread this through. Pinch at the base. Then grab our large ball tool and thin out those edges. And this is really just like a starting point for your tulip. Oftentimes I'll observe a tulip that I love and then find that it has a slightly different texture on it. So I'll go ahead and like add some different textures or like little snips or cuts or whatever. This is basically just like, I mean, all the flower tutorials are just a base for your creativity. Then you can of course do this in any color you want. But that's what I try and do with all the tutorials within the Academy, is allow you to use them and then kind of take them and run. I don't want it to just be like a copy paste thing, because then you're not really getting everything that you can out of it. And of course, like when you make your flowers, they're gonna look different from mine. And that's just like the way we hold the tools, the veiners you have. But I think mostly like kind of your own hand is going to make a different flower than everybody else. So that is kind of what makes it great, having sugar flowers. They're really unique to the artist who made them. So let's put our dowel underneath, or our skewer. And take the wide end of our Dresden and then just texturing that inwards. Like, we want these all to look slightly different, so don't be worried if they are, because that's exactly what's supposed to happen. They should all have different imperfections, different kind of movement. Okay, let's get these in our mold. Just gently laying those in, not really pressing them down too hard. perfect. So let's let these dry overnight. I'm gonna do 3 more petals so that we have enough for 1 full flower. And then we are going to get to the centers. So we have our 18 gauge wire here, and that has been hooked on the end, and our green gum paste. So we only need a small amount for the centers, and I'll show you what they look like. Something like this. And you can do either 3 kind of little flaps, or you could do 4. I like to do kind of a mix of both. So we're gonna start with a piece of gum paste. I always start like slightly bigger, and then we can always snip some extra off if we need to. So this has been kneaded pretty well. Let's roll this into a nice smooth ball. So we're going to make this into a cone with kind of a bulbous end. So this part we want to be fairly even in width. And then the tip we're going to have almost like a bit flattened out like this. Almost like a nail or a screw. So I'm gonna pinch a little bit off. We only need about this much. So I'm gonna dip the end of my wire into some water so it adheres nicely. Wipe off the excess. Then we're gonna insert that right into the middle. And I want the end, the hooked end to end up in the top of this, and then you can smooth it out just by rolling it between your fingers onto the wire. Okay, now for the fun part. So we're going to, I'll do a 3 here. What we're gonna do is take our tweezers and we're going to pinch quite a big piece of gum paste towards itself and then flatten it out. So I'm just doing like tiny little motions so that it flattens out. Now I take my Dresden tool and I like to smooth out the middle parts. So just between all of those little flaps, smooth that out. And then I'm going to flatten those just a little bit with my fingers. All right, now take your X-Acto knife and you're just gonna make a line down the center of each of your flaps. So going right from the middle, all the way down. Next, what I'm gonna do is snip off the base here. So I'm kind of trying to keep it parallel to the base, and then I'm going to cut perpendicularly to that. So the flap has kind of like now come loose. This just gives us a bit more movement when we're going to texture them next. So just smoothing that out. Now the fun part, we get to do a little wave. So I'm just gonna use my tweezers to help me. And then you can use your fingers too. So just having a little wave back and forth. This is kind of like a funkier tulip center. Some of them are a little bit more boring, but if you're making them, why not just make the fun one? All right, now take your Dresden tool. I like to use the pointy end for this, and I'm gonna poke inwards between each of our little wavy bits. And just play around with it until you're happy. Let's chat about stamens quickly. So you have 2 different options. I get these stamens just online. I will link those in the description box below. Or if you're in the membership, they're gonna be in the PDF section. Yes, these ones are kind of like long brown lily stamens, I believe. And sometimes I'll use these, especially if I'm making a lot of tulips and I know that the centers aren't going to be super visible. These are a good substitute for making your own. But if you would like to make your own, they're pretty easy. All you're gonna need is some 28 gauge wire, and I will cut that quite small. They don't need to be super long. I would say
I'm just gonna cut like, I don't know, 2 inches of wire for each of them. And I think that's gonna be fine. Now I have some brown gum paste here, and I used burgundy, green, and black to achieve this color. So the 2 colors, burgundy and the green, canceled each other out to make a brown, since they are complementary colors. And then the black just helped to kind of like mute it down a little bit more. So you just need a tiny bit, and about that much should do it. Just roll it into a little log. Get the end of your wire just a little bit wet. Insert that. And then secure that on your wire. Just make sure it's nice and even. Then I like to use, we can just use our X-Acto since it's here. You just need to create a central line on it, just like that. And then just let that dry. So I would make 6 of these, or use 6 stamens for each of your flowers. So totally up to you which one you'd prefer to do.
Thank you so much for watching part 1. Part 2 will be here in a week. Be sure to hit that like button if you did enjoy this tutorial, and subscribe to my channel so that you don't miss out on next week's tutorial and then all future ones. Again, thank you for watching. Check out the description box below for all the details on everything in this video, and I will see you next week.